depending on what rulers, then in power, and what kind of the kind of patronage that the ruler wants to bestow to a particular religious teachers or otherwise. Yeah. So when Nuruddin Araniri, of course, arrived and been patronized by the Achinese ruler, what happened was those who were the champion of Wahdatul Wujud were out of power, right? They were suppressed, and Nuruddin Araniri, proposed, Wahdatul Suhud, which is already in currency in medieval Islam India, and he introduced that in Aceh. Yeah? So the power struggle ensued to a point that in 1644 Nuruddin, have to leave Aceh. Yeah, we don't know, by force or by voluntary, we don't know. But anyway, he left. But another person who was a proponent of Wahdatul Wujud, which is the rival to Nuruddin Araniri, Saiful Rijal, returned to Aceh. But later on, Saiful Rijal was executed by the accusation that he was trying to usurp the throne. Yeah? We don't know whether it's because of the old rivalry or because he was found to be committing treason, durhaka to the Aceh Sultan. In Java, we know about this legendary story about Siti Jenar, who claimed like Al-Halaj, Ana Al-Haq, I am the ultimate reality. He was executed on orders of Wali Songo, the ninth apostle, supposedly a ninth apostle of the Javanese Islam. In Banja, there is a recorded episode, of Haji Abdul Hamid Abulung, and this ulama, what do you call it? Muhammad Arshad Al-Banjari declared Abulung as heretic, not heretic, heretic, and Abulung was executed on the order of Sultan Tahmidullah, who was then one of the ruler that patronized Al-Banjari. Right? Now, let me move on into this, Abdul Rauf Singkil. It's quite interesting. Just now I've mentioned about the controversies that involved the court, right? But here we have another personality, after that intense rivalry between the Orthodox group against Wahdatul Wujud, then rose Abdul Rauf Singkil. Abdul Rauf Singkil was a learned, prominent man, who had studied in Mecca, and he studied. He had a teacher by the name of Ibrahim al-Qurani. Right? In fact, in 1675, he wrote to his teacher as the opinion on the concerns about widespread of Wahdatul Wujud and Martabat Tujuh in the Malay world. Ibrahim al-Qurani was opposed Wahdatul Wujud, and Abdul Rauf also opposed Wahdatul Wujud, but without labeling them as Zindiq, Mulhid, and Kafir. And also about the execution that happened on Kamaluddin Jawi. That was also was asked, whether he agreed on that. Apparently, Ibrahim al-Qurani said no, that's not the way to go. So that's I think we could sense here the kind of contestation within this religious group. All right. Then this is where I quite interesting that the tarjuman, that the tafsir of the Quran that Abdul Rauf Singkil accomplished. There's a translation made by Professor Peter Riedel. I think on the tarjuman is a very big book. And then there are some other works. If you go to Malay bookstores today, you can still find some of these classical work. There's been given new kind of introduction, new transliteration, and so on. So I'm just giving you an example of works that you can come across today. Right? So this is where I want to share, the Ibrahim al-Qurani, who wrote from Mecca, who wrote this tract called Itaf al-Daki Bishar al-Tufat al-Mursala ila Ruh al-Nabi. This is in response to a particular work being used by being written by Sheikh Muhammad bin Sheikh Fadullah al-Burhanpuri, from India. on the what do you call it, the Martabat Tujuh. So Abdul Rauf Singkil asked his teacher the opinion, and this is where Ibrahim Qurani wrote a long, yeah, a long response. Yeah, just let me read a bit here. Yeah, here, let's say, exalted those who are close to him, those admirable ones, or those who have set their foot on any path of their past based on the Quran and the Sunnah, through perfect obedience, both outwardly al-Zahir and inwardly al-Batin, as rendered by the devout and pure. This is the reason why many of them, the Jawiyin, because the Jawiyin is the Arabic term for the people in Southeast Asia, in Nusantara, Jawiyin, Jawi people, orang Jawi, have deviated from the right path, and why impure belief has arisen. In fact, they have entered into crooked camp of atheism, al-Zandaqah, and heresy, al-Ilhad. I have been told by the Jawiyin that among the famous book in the compendium entitled Al-Tufa al-Musalla ila Ru'an Nabi, peace be upon him, written by divinely assisted adept Sheikh Muhammad bin Sheikh Fadullah al-Burhanpuri, may God Almighty cause him to be of service. So it's still very a gentleman response, you know, without trying to say bad words about their rivals, or things that they agree. So I'm saying that there's a kind of, I think, finesse here, right? Even you disagree, you say good words about your opponents. And then this is Daqaid al-Huruf of Abdul Rauf Singkil. I got it from one of the texts here. You see, when I embarked the study in Malay studies, you know, I read both the Malay text and the English text. Sometimes the English text I come across, and you know, I just copy them, I photocopy, and sometimes I even paste, you know, because at that time I don't have computer access. So these are some of my old notes actually. Yeah. So I couldn't trace where actually that I got it. Yeah, because I was so, you know, it's very hard to get a good English translation. Yeah. Sometimes the old Malay words is quite hard to understand too. So, you know, it helps, you know, to understand also the English rendition to this. Yeah. So basically, this is Abdul Rauf's take upon the advice of his teacher Ibrahim al-Qurani. So what I'm trying to say here, that the intellectual tradition move in a large space within, not just in the Malay-Indonesian world, but across the Indian Ocean, right? Relating to the works in India and the response to Mecca in Middle East. Yeah? So in that sense, you know, the Malays of the region is very much interconnected with the larger Muslim world. You know, it's not, you know, some isolated place. All right. Fadli, is it okay now?
Yes,
Yeah.
Dr. Azhar. Yeah.
All right. So we have Syair Ma'rifat. This is quite interesting. If you want to see now, you know, he wrote in prose, yeah, but he also wrote in verse. Yeah? So one of these is Syair Ma'rifat, which Singkil wrote. Yeah, I have no translation for this, but I will give just a gist to this verse. Jikalau diibarat sebiji kelapa, kulit dan isi tiada serupa. Janganlah kita bersalah sapa, tiada beza, tiadalah berapa. Sebiji kelapa ibarat sama, lafaznya 4, satu makna. Di situlah banyak orang terlena, sebab pendapat kurang sempurna. Kulitnya itu ibarat syariat, tempurung itu ibarat tarikat. Isinya itu ibarat hakikat, minyaknya itu ibarat makna. So if you look at the allegories that we use here, it's about, you know, the path that you chose, the path of the mystical path, you know, and then he used this very much local Southeast Asian flavor, which is coconut, yeah, which is native to the region. And the coconut says about the outcast, the husk, yeah, the coconut itself, and the oil that we can derive from the coconut milk. So, you know, that's quite interesting in the sense that using local imageries to explain the religious Sufi teachings. And in Riau, for example, you have also syair, something like that. Yeah, sifat 20, which means attributes to God. Ya. Asal mengenal segala yang maujud, bezakan hakikat mukmin wujud dengan hakikat wajib al-wujud, tiada sekutu, tiadalah sujud. Mengenal Allah permulaan agama, mengenal yang empat bersama-sama, apabila berhimpun suatu nama pada Allah baharu diterima. So this is where another more adapted version, something like Abdul Rauf Singkir, less of wadatul wujud, but more closer to the orthodox teaching. Yeah? And imagine, people are writing syair. If today you ask syair, syair is always linked to something literary. But in the past, it was not the case. Yeah? Many of the syair is written to explain religious tenets, especially sophistic teachings. Right? Because of the, the kind of the style that within Syair can allow for that kind of mystical allegories. Yeah? And you know that mystical teaching requires allegories in order to explain the message. Right. So then we have another personality, Kemas Fakhruddin. So he himself also, like he came later, slightly later than, I think slightly later than Abu Rauf Singkil. Kemas Fakhruddin al-Palembangi, who hailed from Palembang, wrote this Kitab Mukhtasar. Yeah? I have the one in Bahasa, and it's quite interesting if since you have the one in English and allow me, yeah, to read in Malay. Yeah? All right. So this is I'm reading the same thing. Yeah? Dan bahawasanya, ya, pada tiap-tiap batin baginya lahir. Okay, sorry, let me begin. Dan ketahui olehmu bahawasanya bagi mereka itu syariah, yaitu bahawa engkau sembah akan Allah Ta'ala. Dan tarikah, yaitu bahawa engkau kasatkan akan dia dengan ilmu dan amal, dan hakikah yaitu natijahnya kedua, yaitu bahawa engkau pandang akan dia dengan nur yang ditaruhkan akan dia dalam batin hati. Dan bahawasanya tiap-tiap batin baginya lahir, dan tiap-tiap lahir itu baginya batin. Dan syariah itu lahir hakikah, dan hakikah itu batin syariah. Dan keduanya mulazim, satu makna. Maka syariah dengan hakikah sunyi, yakni hampa, seperti padi tiada berisi. Dan hakikah dengan tiada syariah itu batil. Dan diumpamakan yang tiga itu dengan buah niur. Buah niur means kelapa, ya. Maka syariah itu seperti kulit yang lahir. Dan tarikat itu seperti yang di dalam. Dan hakikat itu seperti minyak yang pada batin isi. Dan tiada sampai kepada isi, melainkan dengan mengupas kulit. Dan tiada sampai kepada minyak, melainkan dengan melumatkan isi. So it's again, using the coconut and kelapa lah, yeah. Now we know coconut now ni for nasi lemak lah, yeah. But this is being used for to explain religious teachings, yeah. I mean, how the ultimate goal is to be like the oil that which derived from the coconut milk. If you cook rendang, right? You boil your coconut milk, oil, yeah, can be derived from it. So it says here that there are various kind of mankind, the category. Yeah? First, pada dalam manusia itu berbagai beberapa bahagian. Pertama, laib, the weak, dan mereka itulah segala orang yang awam, ya. Dan kedua khawas, ya, the select, ya. Dan mereka itu segala wali, dan ketiga khawas al-khawas, dan mereka itu segala nabi alaihim assalat wassalam. Ya. So to me this is one of the many interesting aspects. I can go on and on just to show you the beauty of this kitab. And then we have another personality, not Kemas Fakhruddin, also from Palembang. His name is Shihabuddin, who wrote this text called Risalah, but I don't have this in English translation. Yeah? And this is where similarly Shihabuddin mentioned about what happened in Southeast Asia. He said, syahadan banyaklah sesat orang Jawi yang tiada ditunjuk. Allah Ta'ala akan mereka itu pada jalan iktikat al-sunnah wal jamaah dengan. So this is already, you can sense here, a more formalized orthodox Islam coming into place. Yeah? So Shihabuddin is trying to say that, there are Muslims who go astray and not following the orthodox teaching. Yeah? So on and so on. So see this kind of work being taught and then copied and then distributed throughout the region. Some of Malay works, in fact, arrived in Java and being translated into Javanese and being used. All right. So in Shihabuddin's Risalah, right, it's quite interesting where he denote the kind of knowledge, a tripartite knowledge which is needed, by the the student of religion. It says that, hai talib, maksudnya ilmu itu tiga perkara. Hey student of religion, there are the grades of knowledge is of three kinds. It says that ilmu al-yakin, which means speculation and argumentation. Then another one he says ain al-yakin, by way of observation and vision. And then the other one he says haq al-yakin, acquired by experience. So if you want to go into details, you can go and check some of these I won't be able to give you the fuller details of the meaning, but more or less, I just want to show you that there's a kind of sophistication, right, that religious learning during that time. It's not simply the one that normally we come across, on Arkan Islam, the 5 pillars of Islam, Arkan Iman, the 6 pillars of faith. Which is normally the basic standard where we are socialized. When I was a young boy, that was Arkan Arkanul Islam, Arkanul Iman. That's the basic things that we have, apart from all our rituals obligation. But looking at this text, we can see the kind of standard, actually a high standard, of religious learning then. Okay. All right. So the cardinal teachings that can be found in Kitab Kuning basically divided into 3 branches, right? Often at times the Malay will call it tiga serangkai, right? The 3 branches, and the 3 branches. One, of course, you need to be familiar with Usuluddin, or sometimes Ilmu Tauhid, sometimes even some call Kalam, depending on your school of thought, right? And Aqaid al-Nasafi is one of the earliest Malay texts that can be found. And Professor Muhammad Najib Alatas have edited this text, and he claimed that this is the oldest known Malay manuscript. Yeah? So if you read this Aqaid al-Nasafi, of course, originally written in Arabic, but translated into Malay. You can sense, even the words used, you can say, old Malay words used. Very much telling you about the kind of transition period from the very Sanskrit kind of Malay to a more Arabic influence Malay. And then of course we have fiqh. Fiqh means legal Islam, by Nuruddin Arani Siratul Mustaqim, who I mentioned just now, who wrote this compendium called Bustanus Salatin. Then, of course, we have many works on tasawwuf of Sufism. That's where I mentioned earlier that the Hamzah Fansuri, Samsudin As-Sumatrani, and the rest were famous for that. So today, if you go to any bookstore, Malay bookstores, Muslim bookstores, or even our public library, you can see some of this work. Yeah, I myself couldn't read all, but basic works like Kitab Sabil al-Muhtadin by Arshad al-Banjari, yeah? Some biography of Abdul Samad al-Palembangi, Nuruddin I mentioned just now, and this one is Samsudin As-Sumatani, is still available, meaning that there is a demand, there's an interest for this kind of kitab. So one would say it's still a living tradition. Right? Although we can say that whether our local asatiza are still familiar, I'm not sure about that. That it demands a different the study, but generally I think we can note that in some other parts, especially in Java and in Malay Peninsula, or even in Sumatra and Borneo, these work are still being referred to. Or at least with the rise of many Islamic state university in Indonesia, right, where Islamic studies are given a premium emphasis, this kind of work are still around. All right. Then we have, if we know, and I think I should have put this slightly earlier, yeah, that the path of the mystics affirmed all throughout the kitab Kuning tradition, kitab Jawi tradition, almost all that I noted, all affirm that there is four paths that needs to be undertaken by those who enter this road, this royal road of achieving what do you call it, spiritual bliss. Yeah? One, affirmation of Sharia, which is basically God's law, yeah, what had been demanded in Quran and Hadith. Enter into tariqat, Sufi brotherhood, which is the sense that you need a guru, you need a teacher to teach you those. How do you want to be a good student of religion, or want to be a good Sufi learner? And then you need to master, yeah, the corpus of knowledge to attain a ma'rifat, yeah, gnosis, sometimes we call it. And the ultimate goal is to attain that station called hakikat, yeah, the ultimate reality. Yeah? So it's no easy. It is not recommended to all. Most will say, most of the texts will say that, for the common people, just teach them Sharia, that suffice, right? But those who wanted to go more, this is where they should pursue. Right? And one example is the kind of symbolism. Just now I mentioned about the symbolism of the coconut, right? To explain the kind of layers of religious mastery or religious comprehension that one can hold or can get. But this one is by Hamzah Fansuri's poem on Syair Perahu. And look at this allegories being used. Perahu, boat. Perahu is a very common ship, yeah, in Southeast Asia. Yeah? Wahai muda, kenali dirimu, ialah perahu tamsil tubuhmu. Tiadalah berapa lama hidupmu, akhirat jua kekal. Yeah. You can read that, the translation in English. Airnya keras, ombaknya cabur, pulau jauh, tempatnya berlabuh. It's a very long syair actually. I teach this syair in my class, and the ultimate man is allegorized as perahu, boat, moving into this vast ocean with lots of all the reef under the sea, the big fishes, the storms, the rough seas, yeah, with the ultimate goal to reach one destination called an island. That's where the perahu and the island comes together, similar to the Wahdatu call for the mystical union between the lover, and the loved. Yeah? So these are all mystical language being used. Yeah? All right. And then, okay, let's leave now. I've mentioned at great length about Sufism in relation to the Kitab Kuning. But There are many other kitab kuning or kitab Jawi, if you want to call it again, that discuss many other things apart from Sufism, right? Origin of man, creation of Adam and Eve, soul of man, and the scholar by the name of Muhammad Nobina, wrote, back in the early 80s. Yeah, I use this in my class too, during my undergraduate days. This is quite interesting, where you can see various sampling of the kind of teaching, which is no different from what Muslims are familiar today, right? So in fact, we will say that traditional kind of Islam had its root from that kitab Jawi or kitab kuning. Of course, over the years, it becomes more simplified, right? And of course, it becomes more or less, what we call it, less literary, I would say. So this is one example about theological exposition of the essence and attributes of God. I won't be reading all, just to give you some sampling, right, of how. And this is where old spelling, this must be some, Dutch edited Netherlands East Indies at that time, yeah, old spelling, yeah, that being used then, yeah, because the Dutch also had a strong interest on the kitab kuning tradition in Java, in Sumatra. Then they have transliterated and they have translated some works. So this is one example, theological exposition, right? And this is another one example on how, for example, you want to ask soal, mana nyawa sahada dan mana rupa sahada dan mana menjadi sahada itu, right? This is a question that what is actually the life of that affirmation of the faith, what is its form, and what is the purpose, yeah, of that affirmation of its shahadat, right? So it explains, So, I mean, I spend many hours in the library, yeah, sometimes reading on all this, and I think it's also part and parcel of my religious exposure. Interesting. Yeah? Next, then of course we come across, yeah, not just about theological formation of faith, but always also about the adoration, of the recognition of the Holy Prophet Muhammad. Yeah? At times, some of these texts are written in Javanese too, right? You can see, yeah? But there's also in Bugis, yeah, and in some other dialects, like Minangkabau, yeah, depending, and Sundanese also. Yeah? And this is one example of text. I just want to show to you that that the Jawi, Kitab Jawi is not just Kitab Kuning is not just in Malay languages. Can also be found in the Javanese language. Yeah? And if this is the adoration of Prophet Muhammad, yeah, in verse, in the Javanese tembang, yeah, this is the Malay version of Qasidat al-Burda. Yeah? And this is, Hai Tuhanku, jadikan harapku akan kurniamu, jangan bertukar adanya di hadiratmu, dan dijadikan akan nikmatmu, jangan berputus selamanya. Dan aku anugerahkan taufil akan hamba mukmin dalam kedua negeri, jangan berputusan adanya, kerana ia melawani nafsunya, tatkala menuntut dia segala yang diketakuti, lari ia sesungguhnya. So, these are our classical Malay, yeah, telling about the lives of the prophets. These are being read during Prophet's birthday, right? In remembrance of the prophets. And this is by Samsuddin Pasai, so one example also. This is in verse. Just now I mentioned in detail just now about. But other themes, quite interestingly, and I come across texts from, say, Patani. There's this so-called history text, yeah, written by a particular person many ages ago, many centuries ago, by Sheikh Faqih Ali bin Wan Muhammad bin Sheikh Saifuddin bin Al-Abasi Al-Patani. He wrote initially Tariq Al-Patani, but in 19th century, we have this man by the name of Sheikh Daud bin Abdullah Al-Patani. Sheikh Daud Al-Patani wrote a number of books. Yeah? So he kind of adapted, he rewrite, he kind of maybe reformulate certain parts. And this is where, right, he presented to the present audience. So there is a kind of like poetic license, you want to adapt it, you want to, you want to summarize it, you want to be faithful in the original text. It seems that, there is no like kind of intellectual copyright as long as it accorded the name of the original author. Yeah. So this is, so what I'm trying to say here is that the Kitab Jawi is not just about theological, they're also historical works, by implication, right? So then we have quite interesting, right, in this text, Hadikatul Azhar Wariyahin. This is Syed Ahmad Al-Fatani again. And in this text, if you look at my video, well, I guess, if you look at my video, this is the text. I couldn't find the images in the internet. So in Hadikatul Azhar, you can find various, what I call it, small stories, and very brief stories about a particular episodes. And here, Sheikh Ahmad Al-Fatani wrote on the conquest of Constantinople. In that sense, Kitab Jawi also function, as a book of disseminating world history, at least a Muslim world history to the Malay audience. Right? Which, remember, at that time there was no other producers of language. So Haji Wan Muhammad Sahir Abdullah, who's a very hardworking man who had compiled many of Fatani texts, edited this, and this is where I quoted about the fall of Constantinople, the Byzantine, the Constantinia. Here you see it. The Negri Constantinia is Byzantine, Byzantine. And what is interesting, it's about a particular Sheikh Aka Shamsuddin who has that ability to detect the tombstone of one of Rasulullah's, Prophet Muhammad's companion by the name of Sayyidina Abdullah bin Abbas dan Ibnu Umar dan Ibnu Az-Zubair, and Abu Ayyub Al-Ansari, the rest. So apparently this particular Sheikh Shamsuddin, Sheikh Aka Shamsuddin, was able to detect it by virtue of his karamah, right? So it's trying to say that pious men can do miraculous things, right? Because he wanted to detect that tomb of the Sahaba. All right, and then of course there are other works, again about the chosen path of true devotion, what needs to be done, what actually it entails, or what you need to do, what emphasis you should give. So this is one example there. I will give a glimpse of the text from the Kitab Kuning of Kitab Jawi. The teaching of the Sufis are for the elect. This is important, right? It is heavily and frequently emphasized that kind of speculative Sufism is not meant for the ordinary people. Right? It's meant for the elect only. Right? So those who are able to understand the basic foundation and has a guru to guide them. Right? And then, of course, if you want to know the kind of parlance, the kind of language being used, this is one example. Let me read in Malay, then you can sense, the kind of thing, the kind of expression being used. Dan dikendaki dengan katanya, aku engkau di dalamnya, dan kami engkau dan engkau ya, itu yakni daripada pihak ijmal. Belum lagi tafsir, tiada berbeza setengah daripada setengahnya itu. Tetapi aku itu, aku jua, dan engkau itu, engkau jua, dan la itu, la jua. Can you imagine? So there is a kind of oral verbatim here, being put into writing, and that sometimes makes the understanding difficult. If you don't understand the way the oral articulation, you will not be able to understand the meaning. Yeah. So thanks to some linguistic mastery, yeah, there are translation on such work, and this is where I think the edited text normally done at the level of PhD or masters, which actually are very useful for us to appreciate some of these old texts. Yeah? So it demands not just about the religious knowledge, but also the linguistic ability to read many of these old works. Next, this is where I want to mention about a particular text being written by Daud Al-Fatani. This is, I quote from a PhD thesis at University of London, so as by Paul Zenaim Badaruddin, a Malaysian student. And this text has been studied by him. But you can also find that this text are also being sold and read, still being read and still being discussed. Yeah? And as I mentioned, Saidaw bin Abdullah Al-Fatani, Manharu Safi, yeah, it's regarding about the rules, yeah, and the concepts that we use by the Sufi adepts. Yeah? So, this is a long exposition on those. Yeah? And then, quite interestingly, this Martabat Tujuh, I'm sure some of our, it's no longer, I have not come across people who teaching Martabat Tujuh except in some traditional setting, yes, traditional school of thought. Yeah? I mean, if you go around, asking Muslim what is Martabat Tujuh, I don't think many will know. Some old school within certain groups, they are still understood this, yeah. But in many of the older Kitab Kuning or Kitab Jawi, Martabat Tujuh, yeah, is always being discussed. This is part and parcel, yeah, related to that Wahdatul Wujud. Yeah. It says here, the seventh grade of being combines all the corporal grades. So there are 7. So the last grade is actually this grade pertaining to man, the 7th grade. Yeah. With the spirituality uncreated grade of divine unity and the spiritual created grade of the world of spirits, as well as with the grades of divine unicity and the grade of divine unitariness. The 7th grade, the last one of the process of manifestation of God, is named the grade of perfect man. Again, this is not meant for ordinary believers. This is meant for those who have committed themselves to that path, the mystical path. Yeah? We know very well that Insanul Kamil, the perfect man, propounded by Ibn Arabi, propounded by Al-Jili, yeah? and few others in the Muslim heartlands, mystics of the Muslim heartland. This has been discussed throughout the Muslim world, yeah, and also created controversy. Yeah? Today, we hardly will come across people still teaching along this line. Yeah, and of course, from time to time, and since very early days also, there are warning against the aberration of Wahdatul Wujud. Yeah? It's not fair for me just to say that Wahdatul Wujud is very much in common in Malay texts, but there are also from time to time warning against the teaching. Maka sebab itulah banyaklah berwasiat jumpur ahli ilmu tauhid dengan menegahkan ia akan sekalian orang yang mubtadi lagi awam means the public, ordinary Muslim, dengan mutalaah, learning about Islam, ia akan kitab orang yang mubtadi ahli Wahdatul Wujud, yakni kitab Martabat Tujuh yang telah masyhur di dalam negeri Jawi, dan melihat kitab orang yang ahli al-salik supaya jangan tergelincir iktikat 72 kaum yang amat sesat iktikat mereka itu. So it's warning, because there is a hadith by the Prophet Muhammad says that there are 72 of my followers, only one will have the correct path, the rest are deemed aberrant. 72 will be deemed aberrant, wayward. So there's a stern warning. All right. Okay. Overall, the significance of a kitab tradition. I mean, after saying so much, and I don't think I do justice for kitab, but This is a general mapping of what you can expect, how you want to read later on about Kitab Kuning. That is this a strong elements of Sufism, on theology, on Aqidah, on legal precepts, yeah, on even on fatwa, on how to be a good person and ethics or akhlaq, yeah, and all other rituals, manuals, yeah. The array of works will tell you that the Kitab tradition have functioned very well in the propagation of Islam in this region. One, it allows for the continuity and deepening of Islamization throughout history. With no Kitab Kuning, you cannot expect that Islamization can continue in this part of the world, right? Some pockets where Islam first appeared, but because it was disconnected, there's no contact with the other Muslim world, let's say in some Champa areas in highland of central Vietnam, right? They evolved totally a different kind of Islam, which you could no longer seen as Islamic. Yeah, it has evolved on its own, because of severance. Yeah, I think with this nexus of ulama and nexus of kitab, right? But those in the pesisir, in the coastal areas where there is a strong connection to the Islamic world, that's where the areas where you can see a stronger Islamization taking place. And it explains very well why in Sumatra and Malay Peninsula and coastal Borneo has a strong sense of Islamization as compared to inner Java. Yeah, coastal Java up north have a strong tradition of Islamization, but in inner highland Java may not be the case. Only later on, they are catching up very well. That this Kitab tradition allows for greater coverage of Islamic corpus in the local community to study, interpret, and at least to recopy those texts. It established a firm tradition that lend to other knowledge of production. Yeah, it kind of like extend. Yeah? It enabled the continuing contacts with the Islamic heartland, Middle East, the Arabian Peninsula, of course, the Indian subcontinent, including amongst Muslim polities in the region, between, say, works of Hamzah Fansuri, after a few years can be found later on in Sulawesi. It's quite interesting. And at the time where there was no Asia, how long the travel from Aceh to by boat, yeah, by ship to Sulawesi. And you can find works of Hamzah, yeah, in southern Thailand, yeah, in Malay Peninsula, in Borneo, right, and in Sulawesi. Infusing ideas of multidisciplinary approach in the sense that theological, legal, mystical, rational kind of Islam, the understanding of Islamic message. There is not one single discipline that dominates. There are various ways of understanding. If you have a legal lens, you understand Islam in more practical sense. If you have a mystical lens, you understand Islam in more mystical lens. It promote learning and production of local and religious knowledge. This is very important. Yeah, which today we are asking whether we have spent enough resources and time to promote local works on the production of knowledge of religious texts from this part of the world. Because I think over-reliance from, say, Muslim heartland, we have not been producing enough of our own. Lastly, where varieties of sources books are used, varieties of knowledge corpus, allows the student of religion, the Santri, to have a plurality of traditions, interpretation offered, with no single source to dominate. So in a sense, when they study a particular compilation of hadith, from, say, Bukhari, and a compilation of Tirmidhi, yeah, and so on, and all the tafsir and all the interpretation of the Quran, that will allow for them to see the various interpretation at work and make them see that there is not easily one way of looking at things. So the problem of challenges today, we have traditionalism, yeah, in religious establishment. Traditionalism means kind of clinging to the past for the sake of clinging to it, yeah. That is this kind of like a refusal, yeah, to adopt, to allow for contextualization or to allow for reinterpretation. We have a problem contemporary in many parts of Muslim world, including here, on textualism vis-a-vis on literalism. Both got problem when textualism is just highly text but not linking to context, or worse, reading text in a literal way, right? Be it the source, Quran Hadith, or the corpus, the Kitab Kuning or Kitab Jawa. There are formulation of thought when it becomes more what I call officially sanctioned. Strict demarcation of knowledge. Suddenly, there is a new knowledge comes in, and then suddenly you make a distinction between Western secular knowledge, ilmu dunyawi, and then you put all things under religious knowledge. You call it ilmu ukhrawi, which in the past we have never seen such demarcation. Whereas also we see some challenges where Malay Islamic work with literary expression like hikayat, syair becomes ever more diverse from the Kitab Kuning proper. It becomes very much, strict in its technicality, but less of its, literary nuances. The Kitab expression, which had literary and poetic dimension, become more formalized and standardized in expression. The reliance of exogenous Islamic kitabs from outside without much production of endogenous ones, which I mentioned earlier, lack of critical studies on this text, while biography and summaries predominate. If you go to the bookstores, we see a lot of summaries, but not critical studies. And those who embark at the higher level, at masters and PhD, are not so many, right? Let's hope, we create more interest over the years. These are part and parcel of the Islamic heritage of Southeast Asia too, right? Of course, we see today there is a contemporary interest. I mentioned just now that the late Haji Muhammad Sargir Abdullah, right, worked very hard in the compilation of most of the texts that he could found and gathered from Patani. And Patani is a powerhouse in the Malay Peninsula in the production of the Kitab Jawa. Right? In Java, we have Ahmad Basu, is very productive in doing even online reading of the Kitab Kuning especially the Javanese texts. Read together with young students, and in doing addition. So from time to time, you see even like this, Puisi Perlawanan dari Pesantren, or this old text being revived, edited, and being presented to the contemporary readership. Well, I have made recommended readings here. These are some of the works available in English about Southeast Asian Islam, of the Sufi work mostly, right? These are very interesting to read. Maybe this December holiday you might want to read one of the, I think, the best translation from Said Nagib Alatas, Mysticism of Zaman Suri, to West and Brackle, Dutch scholars who translated the poems of Hamza, Muhammad Bukhari Lubez, who made a comparison between the kind of Wadatul Wujud in the Turkish and the Malay works, and of course the Syekh Bahari, this Javanese mystic. And it's quite interesting that the Javanese texts also have to offer many interesting stories of pious men against orthodoxies, or Sufi men against orthodoxies. There are general references. You can also take note of Braginski, Peter Riedel, Azumadi Azra, and my former lecturer, the late Liao Yok Fang. I studied classical Malay literature in his last class, and thanks to him that I was able to appreciate this text. And lastly, allow me to read two, one from the Sufi text in Kitab Kuning, and the other one not necessarily can be called Kitab Kuning, but it's an important text, Tajuh Salatin, written during the time of Hamzah Pansuri in Aceh by the man named called Bukhari al-Jawhari in Aceh. Let me read first, right, about the invocation, the last one, on the Sufi invocation of the way to go. Right? Adapun dikir la ilaha illallah, itu pembuka pintu hati sanubari yang jadi daging yang bangsa jasmani itu, dan dikir Allah pembuka pintu hati maknawi, dan dikirnya huwa-huwa itu membuka pintu hati sir, yakni menuliskan ism, ya, isim Allah itu dalam hati kepada kalam fikir dakwatnya emas atau perak itu dan cahayanya, dan diniatkan seperti cahaya matahari atau bulan itu dibuat kiblat kepada. Essentially, it says about the need of contemplation. Yeah, a contemplation, a spiritual contemplation, to make your existence, worth living, right? With the what I call it, the service to God, yeah, contemplation of your existence, and always in the remembrance of God. Yeah? But then you have another text, yeah, in Tajuh Salatin, which says this, right? Dunia ini yang indah, terindah pun ia, hina jua ia lagi termulia. Bahawa yang tiada mengenal dunia, bahawa hidupnya itu adalah sia-sia. Which has a slightly different connotation from what the earlier invocation that I mentioned about the need of that spiritual contemplation. The world is beautiful. The most beautiful also is she. Despicable she is also the most honorable. Thus those who the world do not get to know, thus they live their lives in vain. And lastly, my parting word, ladies and gentlemen, Hamzah Pansuri says this, hidup ini umpama dagang, datang musim, kita kan pulang. Our life is like this transient traveling. When it comes the season of monsoon, we will part. Very much tell us about the life of maritime Southeast Asia. And that dagang itself also is a life about not just the Santri spreading Islam, but our life as spiritual, as human beings, with the spiritual need to find the meaning and depth of spirituality. On that note, I end my sharing today. Sekian, wabillahi taufiq wal hidayah. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi taala wabarakatuh.
Thank you, Dr. Azhar, for delivering yet another insightful topic under the WWS. Dr. Azhar, I'm actually mindful about the time. So right now it's about 9:45. We have a couple of questions in the Q&A. Would you like to address them?
Yeah. Okay, yeah. So, from Cik Hamid, guys, Hamid Ismail, in your opinion, why those exponents of Wadatul Wujud were executed by the rulers of the era? One is it was first based on record, it was first patronized. Yeah, I suspected that it was not just simply because of Wadatul Wujud as a doctrine, but also court rivalry. So there is always these two dimensions at work. Yeah? I don't know which one predominates, but if we say alone that it is called Wadatul Wujud, right? Why, in that sense, Samsudin al-Sumatrani was able to be around the Achinese court, yeah, for more than 3 decades, 30 years. Why there was no action? Okay? Because I think he was a charismatic, powerful man, can still hold the fort, but because when the rulers change, and of course there's some rulers have made preference and they make alignments to those foreign traders or ulama which they favored or otherwise, yeah. So that kind of conflict, yeah, could explain why Wadatul Wujud become the victim. Apart from that, we must also agree with the fact that the Orthodox school, which want to maintain a kind of more clarity, simplified understanding of Islam, will not allow that kind of speculative interpretation of Islam. Yeah? So, within Muslim world elsewhere, yeah, in the heartland of Islam, Al-Halaj was known to utter this, declaration, Ana al-Haq, yeah, I am the ultimate truth. Yeah? That was, he was persecuted. That was in Iraq, in Baghdad. Yeah? In Java, I mentioned, so there was this controversy of the kind of the legitimate Sufism that can be tolerated. So yeah, that's the reason. As long as I think there's the Wadatul Wujud remain within certain what I call it perimeter, yeah, and known not to be spreading to the larger population, then it will be tolerated, right? If only that there's some involved power contestation, then surely it will be suppressed. All right, from Said Ali Smaid, do the usage of Kitab Kuning assist in identity of Nusantara Islam as compared to Islam found in Middle East? Yeah, in that sense, I would say, yeah, because before the arrival of new texts in the 20th century, these texts that being used in the Southeast Asia gives us that color and a kind of like the ulama from this region are known, because that was the time when there was no there was no boundaries like today, like Malaysia, Indonesia, Brunei, Singapore. The ulamas of this region, yeah, their work of say al-Palembangi can be used in Patani, and Patani can be used in Java can be used in Sumatra and others. So it gives that kind of that kind of a common pool of Nusantara Islam scholars, yeah, sharing and giving the foundation of Islam in this region, I would say. But of course, we should not say that it is totally diverse from the Islamic heartland, because, as I mentioned earlier, that the Mecca was the main paradigm center of the ulama sphere. Yeah? In fact, even Muslim rulers look up to the Sharif of Mecca for legitimacy. It's quite interesting. They don't go to Constantinople to get the Ottoman Sultan, yeah, the one much later, but like rulers of Aceh, rulers of Banten were known, or even Java, Mataram were known to send letters to Sharif of Mecca, the ruler of Mecca, to get a kind of stamp of approval that they are the legitimate sultan. Yeah? So the connection with the Islamic heartland is still there, but at the same time, the connection within the region was building up very strongly. I think that's my answer.
Okay, I think the Dr. Azhar, I think we have no more questions.
No more, yeah?
Yeah,
All right.
Yeah, no
Okay.
question on Facebook also as well.
All right.
So yeah, thank you, Dr. Azhar. Once again, we have now come to the end of the lecture. We hope you found the session beneficial and informative.